think we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Bart Redford. I want to welcome you on behalf of KU Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies to this week's Brownbag. This is our first in our series of talks. I see a lot of familiar faces, so if you're here or you've been here previously, then you know that we do this every week on some topic related to our region. If you're interested in finding out, like some of the top talk titles, of subsequent brown bags, as well as all of our other events, we've got event listings on the small table over here to the side. Let me tell you about just a few things that are happening later this week. On Friday, January 29th at 11 o'clock here in this room, we've got the first meeting in the semester for Jayhawks Without Borders. It's a club for undergraduates and graduate students as well who are interested in international studies. And then Friday also from 6 to 9 on Edwards campus, we're going to be hosting a film series also in Russian called the film this Friday is Vokzal dla Dvoich, a railway station for two. And that's going to be introduced by Tatiana Scanlon, professor in Johnson County Community College. Our speaker today is Krzysztof Borowski. He is a doctoral student in Slavic languages and literatures as well as in linguistic anthropology. And you know him probably if you've taken a Polish course in the last several years. His interest in terms of research includes sociolinguistics, language, ethnicity, identity in Europe, regionalism, nationalism. He comes from us with a BA and an MA from the University of Wrocław. So, and I'm very thankful initially just because he volunteered to be the very first. It's difficult to find those brown bag speakers for that very first slot, so I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I actually was very glad to go as first because it's always easiest, so, okay, well, let me take a seat before I stand up. So what I'd like to talk to you today about is part of my ongoing project, which is concentrated on the processes of ethnic identity, performance, and construction online, which I hope to convert into a dissertation one of those days. So today I'll be talking about the Kashubian and Salesian minorities in Poland. But before I go into details, here's a disclaimer. I will not be referring to ethnic minority as it is outlined in the 2005 Act on National and Ethnic Minorities and Regional Language in Poland. Instead, I will just refer to those as just groups that have a strong subjective feeling of distinctiveness, and this is overt in things and factors like language and culture and traditions, so on and so forth. Plus, neither Kashubs nor Salesians actually are legally recognized as an ethnic minority in Poland, so that's also why I'm doing this here. So for the purpose of my study, I analyzed and created a corpus of Facebook postings generated between January and July 2015 from 3 fan pages. So these are the Kaszubsko Jednota, the Kashubian Union, and the 2 Silesian fan pages. So we have Silesian Autonomy Movement and the Association of People of Silesian Nationality. So overall, that amounts to around 10,000 postings that I analyzed. And so because I'm dealing with national discourse here, the keyword that I was looking for was nation, so naród in Polish. Okay, now in terms of framework, I'm working within critical discourse analysis. So what I'm interested in here are 3 distinct levels. So we have the discourse level, the text level, and sociocultural practices. Now, when talking about discourse, I will treat it as a social tool that on one hand communicates certain ideas, but on the other hand is also used per se to convey certain ideas, to construct identities, and to sustain these identities. Now, when it comes to identity, I just assume the very broad definition by Buckles and Hall from 2005. So I will just understand it as a social positioning of self and others. And 10 years before Buckles and Hall published this specific article, Billig argued that to have a national identity is to actually have a way of talking about nationhood, talking about it. And this is precisely what I'm going to be doing here today in this talk. Now, in doing so, I will treat both groups as communities of practice. So this term was coined sometime in early 1990s. And basically, it refers to a collection of people who engage on an ongoing basis in certain practices, and also a group of people who, by doing that, interact with each other on an ongoing basis. So just like we have here, just like we have it here in these two definitions. So in looking at these two minorities, I will treat them as communities of practicing nationhood, basically. Okay, and among all the questions that pop up here, these are the two that I'm most interested in answering. So first, how national idea and identity are conveyed in language, and second, how national discourse is created through both text and sociocultural practices. Okay, so before I go into details, here's a short introduction into both groups. So Kaszubs, they are mostly, at least those who live in Poland, they are mostly concentrated in this northern reddish area that I can't really reach because I'm not as tall. Whereas Salesians, they are mostly concentrated here in this southern part of Poland. Okay, and so these two groups became apparent to the overall population of Poland and entered the public discourse for good following the two national censuses in Poland. So we had the 2002 and 2011 censuses. So in the first one, we had 5,000 and 170,000 declarations from both groups, respectively, whereas 9 years later, these numbers increased to 230 and 846,000. So overall, we have more than 1 million people in Poland who claim one of these two identifications. Okay. All right. So talking about the Kashubian national discourse, what I'm taking into consideration here is the Kaszubsko Jednota, the Kashubian Union KJ fan page, which does not really represent the mainstream Kashubian voice. But what I think is interesting, why I think it's interesting to look at it is because members of this specific community of practice are actually more open to using the phrases such as Kashubian people, Kashubian nation, which is not really the case as far as the Kashubian Pomeranian Association goes. And one of the first things that becomes overt is that people who are gathered in this community of practice, they also do acknowledge the existence of Salesian nation. So this is what we have here in examples 1 and 2. So we had things like both nations. The Poland is kind of afraid of us, but we are a nation, and so are Salesians, and so we probably should find a way to work together to reach our goals. Now, the phrase Kashubian nation is not as frequent in a corpus as it is, for example, in a case of the Salesian community, but nevertheless, people gathered around this fan page have other ways of conveying the national idea, national discourse. And so one of them is this map. So at first glance, there isn't really anything special about this map, but there's a couple of points that I'd like to point your attention to. So first of all, national Kashubian colors. So we have black and yellow, just like we have it on the flag on the national emblem. Also, we have a very clearly delineated territory, right? And this territory is superimposed on the map of Poland in division into gminas, which is the third level administrative division unit. So here we have this yellow area, and we have a very clearly indicated capital, right? So we have Gdańsk in Kashubian, or Gdańsk, as it is known in Polish, or Danzig, which is probably, yes.
Is that the Kashubian language?
So yes, so all the names are written.
That one.
Yeah, right. So this is all written in Kashubian. So the same goes for Faces of Water, right? So we have the Big Sea in Kashubian, whereas in Polish that would just be the Baltic Sea. So here Kashubian names as well, and here this is also in Kashubian. So the map of the Kashubian land. This is what it says in here. And so this is just one of the examples of how national discourse can be really embedded in things like maps. Probably one of the things that we don't really consider that much. But if you go to the organization's website, you will notice that the number of national symbols is really much bigger. So apart from the map, there's the Kashubian coat of arms, there's the flag, there's the national anthem, there's the national emblem, and there's also some information about the Kashubian capital, which is Gdańsk, as indicated by this specific community. And also, the map comes with a list of all the localities found within the delineated border in 3 languages. So we have Kashubian, German, Polish. Okay, and so this elaboration suggests that national awareness is really something that is of importance for members of this community. And if you take it, and this is actually confirmed in the corpus itself. So unlike the other Kashubian organization, KJ is really geared at conveying and transmitting this message of nationhood. Here's another example. So this one involves David Schulist, who is a Canadian-born co-author of a trilingual dictionary. So last year he was interviewed in the Radio Kaszebę, and when asked about how do you like it here in Poland, he responded, "Well, in Poland, I'm not in Poland. I'm in Kaszubia. I'm in Europe." Right. So here again we have a clear juxtaposition of those things. And so this posting, of course, created some buzz in the community, and it also elicited some comments, 2 of which you can see on a slide. So somebody clearly perplexed asked, "Well, wait a minute, isn't Kaszubia in Poland anymore?" And the response was, "Well, no, we're in Kaszubia. It's Poland who wants us, not the other way around." Right? So here again we have this very clear juxtaposition between us and them, Kaszubia and Poland, right? Just like what you can see here on this map, because we have the yellow-colored area, but beyond that, there's literally a gray zone. I mean, we don't really know what's going on out there. And the map doesn't tell us either, right? Yes?
Did that answer imply that they didn't think they were in, that Poland was not in Europe? It's not in Kaszubia, not in Europe.
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, it was probably just a smart rhetoric tool to avoid talking about Poland and talk about Kaszubia, you know. So instead of talking, well, it's not Poland, it's Kaszubia because it's our land, you know. So that's the way that I see it here. Okay, now maps aren't, of course, the only means which you can use to convey national discourse, because sports provides a really good opportunity for that too. So what you can see here in the picture is the Kashubian Griffins. So that's the Kashubian hockey team dubbed as the Kashubian national hockey team. Okay, and so here we have phrases like our nation, our fatherland, and Kashubia forever, written, of course, in Kashubian in here. So apart from the hockey team, there's also a Kashubian curling team in Canada, if you are ever interested in seeing it. So whenever there would be mentions about some sports events, the fan page administrators would refer to those using phrases such as Kashubian national team, Kashubian curling team, or the national hockey team, right? And another example, the Griffins will fight for our national honor and the Kashubian fatherland, right? So one may wonder, well, can you actually talk about national team if you're not a nation or if you don't have a separate state, right? Well, this is what's happening in here. And just to show you a very brief example of what it looks like, I have this, I'd like to show you just 20 seconds of this clip, but I'd like to point your attention to all the national symbols that will be present in those 20 seconds. Okay, so again, we have a, so that's a footage of a hockey game between the Griffins and another team. Okay, so we have the colors, we have the scarves, there's flags. Yep, exactly. And here we have this big flag that says, we Kashubs, we're a nation. And here we have Kashubska Jednota, so exactly the community that I'm talking about, right? With the Kashubian griffin, the national symbol in the middle of the flag. So on one hand, we have a sports event, but on another, it's always a good occasion to somehow invoke the national feelings and use some national discourse in places like these. Now, Günther Grass presents a really interesting example in here because his name was also brought up in reference to the Kashubian nationhood. So last year, when the writer passed away, he was called the Kashubian Nobel Prize winner. And this information was supplemented with a link to an article which said, quote, when asked about national identity, he used to say he was Kashubian, right? So this seems pretty straightforward. However, if you go to Wikipedia, it is not like this anymore because the English version will tell you, well, he was a Kashubian German writer, so we have a hyphenated identity. The German and Polish versions will tell you he was a German writer, whereas the Kashubian version of website on Günther Grass, which does exist, will tell you he was a German writer who self-identified as Kashubian.
Or is it published in Kashubian language?
Not that I know of. Nope, just German. Right. However, I mean, so the source of this Kashubianness in here is because of his Grass's mother's heritage, whereas his father was a German merchant, Danzig. And finally, the example that I like the most, in which we go from identity construction to identity performance. So the things that you actually do to show others that you have this separate, specific national feeling and this take national pride in Kashubianness in this very case. So on the Kashubian Unity Day, the community organized a trip, like a local trip. And so in the program, the participants first paid respect to a late, well-known Kashubian scholar. And then after reaching the final destination, which were some 9th century ruins, they stuck the Kashubian flags on the ruins and they sang together Zemia Rodno, what is considered to be unofficial Kashubian anthem. So things like this you usually do on July the 4th or November 11th in Poland. So this is an example of a clear manifestation of national feelings in here. Now, what I like about the non-national communities that I research in general is that they often engage in engage in meta-national discourse. So they themselves are very interested and take quite a lot of effort in discussing what their nationhood is, what it should be like, what it should consist of. And here in 5, we have an example of this very meta-national discourse. So overall, we have both textual and non-textual means of conveying the national message here used, and this is supplemented with events like this trip that are supposed to promote the idea of Kashubian nation, of national feelings, of this specific group actually constituting a nation. Now, one of the biggest tasks that Kashubian ethnic entrepreneurs face is to convince people that it is only the national option that will help preserve Kashubian language, heritage, and so on. And so, analyzing the overall corpus, it is quite evident that they do invest quite much time and effort in numerous activities, such as, for example, bilingual summer camps for children. So they start at the very early age, and by doing that, they somehow try to, as I like to say, smuggle some specifically geared message. Right, so now let's go to the second example. So the Salesians, and so here what is used as the main tool to forge national identity, nationhood, national feelings is the socio-political conflict between center and periphery. So Silesia, because of somehow finding itself on a periphery, there's this ongoing pressure on what is considered to be the economic and political center of the country. And so if you take a look at the corpus, the socio-political topics and issues are really the most often topics that you can see. So if you just go through this spreadsheet, people basically just talk politics and politics and politics all the time. And most of the time they are really unhappy, to put it that way, with what's been going on within the last decades, or with what's been going on with the whole region since 1945, when Poland, when the region was included in Polish borders. And so this is what we can see here in examples 6 and 7. So you can easily find people saying things like, well, let's not allow Warsaw to rob us. I mean, just take a look at what's happening here in the region. I mean, the economy is really collapsing. Our region is not really developing well, so we have to come together and do something about it. And so here, what you can see are even voices of separatism and independence. And so that's what I like online media for. So people are not really afraid of saying things that they wouldn't necessarily say in public, right? So of course there are some radical perspectives in the corpus, but overall they are of smaller importance. So that is not to say that all the Silesians are separatists. There's just a small fraction of them who believes that, well, that would probably be the best solution here. Now, what has happened here is that the Silesian ethnic entrepreneurs, they have somehow contributed to building a very robust identity on one hand, but on the other hand, what has happened is that the society have been polarized to a great extent. So that's why we have this stereotype of Silesian as a person who, well, is probably very suspicious about the government, doesn't really want to have to do much in common with, say, Poland, or maybe even tries to secede from Poland and, God forbid, attach the region to, say, Germany or any other country, right? And so because members of this community, of these two communities of practice engage in some in this constant analysis of governmental developments, they even treated last year's words about Salesians being a proud nation with much suspicion. So they just said, well, it doesn't really matter because it's just the elections coming up, so they're just going to say those things, and then they're just going to forget about us. They're just going to abandon us, and we're still going to be ignored and on a side. Now, so there's a whole range of stances present in a corpus. So we have the moderates, we have the nationalists, and we have the separatists. Now, based on my qualitative analysis, what can I say is that the majority of them falls somewhere in between the first two stages. So again, the separatists represent just a small fraction of it. However, those who do express such opinions, they overtly subvert Poland's legitimacy or Poland's political power over the region with all the consequences that go with it. So this is what we have in example 10. So a user says, well, my nationality is Oberschlesian, so my nationality is Upper Silesian, right? It's not Polish. I feel no connection to the Polish flag, right? And in 11, we again have a very strong separatist voice. So we as Salesians again have to fight for our independence or for our distinctiveness, for our nationhood, and sooner or later we will become one, whether the politicians say that there is a Silesian nation or not. Okay, and so one of the tactics used that I find really intriguing is what I call the Exclamation of Salesian nation. So this is what some users engage in, and basically it is based on the premise that if we say that we constitute a nation, well, that's the way it is. So we don't really need any politicians, we don't need anybody, we don't need courts to tell us that we are a nation if we think we are one, right? And of course, what comes along is this irritation when outsiders try to somehow impose some labels on those people. So Salesians in this case take a very constructivist, a very subjective approach to identity, whether it's ethnic identity or national identity. And so in 12 and 14 we have examples of this Exclamation. So we need to somehow instill it, inculcate it in people's minds that we are just a nation, so that it just enters the national discourse. So I was talking about the Kashubian flag. Now let me say a couple of words about the Silesian flag. So on May the 2nd, which is designated as the Polish Flag Day, the Silesian autonomy movement came up with a competition for its users. So the users were supposed to display the Silesian flag in front of their apartment or house or whatever. They were supposed to take a photo of it and post it in a comment in this very posting. And so half of the users who actually participated in this posting did that. But what I find intriguing in this particular case is that not everybody was so happy with the idea of displaying Silesian flag when we have, officially regulated Polish Flag Day. And so I remember one of the users said, and it was written actually in Silesian, so that somehow get to the overall community. So the user wrote, well, come on guys, it's not really good. I mean, I don't think we should actually be doing this on that very specific day. And there was this back and forth between users. So what it shows is that although Salesianness is quite a robust identity, it is still susceptible to identity negotiation. So the users just engage in negotiating what should fall into this category, what should not, what are the things that we can do, and what are the things that we should not be doing. Now, interestingly, a similar discussion began on one of the local dailies website, and it elicited a flood of comments, but also quite a lot of invective, so I will not quote it here today. And so, as I mentioned, the existence of Salesian nation is natural and obvious for members of this community of practice. And so that is why the phrase Salesian nation is not used just to name people or for nomination purposes, but rather there's this specific goal of introducing the phrase into public discourse for good. Now, and if we have some events of negative character, like when the court's ruling to disband the Association of People of Salesian Nationality, it is again used by ethnic entrepreneurs to somehow bolster the overall identity, to support the narrative of discrimination, and to basically show the community, well, just take a look at it. This is happening again. We're just being ignored. We're just being discriminated against. So that's why we cannot really expect anything good happening from Poland. So that's why we have to take the matters into our own hands. And so that is why Salesian identity becomes politically marked, unlike the Kashubian one. So as I demonstrated, internet plays a really big role in forging national identities and forging nationhood among communities. And as noticed by Erickson, instead of weakening national identities, it can actually be used to advantage of those communities. And this is what ethnic media and ethnic entrepreneurs are actually doing. So I'm talking about a Polish example only today, but the same things are happening, say, with the Kurdish people and the Kurdish ethnic media in Germany or Western Europe. The same goes for the Tamils or the Tibetans. So this is like a part of a broader drive to use the internet in order to forge forge national identity or in order to further somehow consolidate these communities. And so what I find really intriguing about that is that by using online media, ethnic entrepreneurs are actually able to bypass the official national education. So if you go to school in Poland, you don't really get taught about those minorities. You don't really get to know the history of Silesia, for example, as a region that precisely. Whereas if we have internet or if we have Facebook, we can connect with many people in a very short period of time, and we can tell them what we think the history is really like. So we are not really forced to tell the official story, the official narrative. So this is really susceptible to further developments. And so as I have demonstrated, ethnic entrepreneurs, they use a lot of tools to forge the national identity idea of Kashubs or Silesians constituting a nation. And most importantly, they are able to link virtual initiatives, like let's just have a Facebook event, whatever, and then transfer it into real life initiatives. So this is, for example, what we had with the trip and the Kashubian flags in the first example, or with the Silesian flag competition in the second example. And so this creates virtually thousands of new field sites for scholars who are interested in things like ethnicity, identity, and nationalism. However, since we're dealing with cyber world in here, maybe we should start talking about cyber nationalism, cyber nationalists, or imagined cyber communities instead. Well, thank you very much for your attention. I'll gladly enjoy any questions you might have.